welcome to the Animal Training Academy Making Ripples podcast show, the show where we share the stories of the ripple-making extraordinaires with behavior nerd superpowers who make up the Animal Training Academy membership. I'm your host and one of the happiness engineers at Animal Training Academy, Shelley Wood from Drop Your Jaws Dog Training in Cape Girardeau, Missouri in the United States. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. This show is brought to you on behalf of the Animal Training Academy membership. So if you like the conversations in these episodes, then we want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people in the ATA membership, which you can find out more about at www.atamember.com. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalog of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help you problem solve your training challenges. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forums area. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behavior geeks. Today we welcome Gabby Boijsen to the show. Gabby often describes herself as a bureaucrat by day, moonlighting as a dog trainer at our Hundskola, our Plus Dog Academy, on nights and weekends. A social worker by education and profession, she has spent a good chunk of her adult life A social worker by education and profession, she has spent a good chunk of her adult work life as a probation officer, mainly working with offenders of intimate partner violence. Nowadays, she is an analyst within a government agency working with behavior change at an organizational level. A self-proclaimed behavior geek and animal rights activist, Gabby strives to learn all she can about all the things that can help herself and others to be better pet parents. She holds a special spot in her heart for shelter dogs, rescues, and currently shares her life with her wife Ida and their Irish stray Jinx, rehomed Chihuahua mix Lily, and Spanish foster pup Riff Raff. Gabby is a recurrent sufferer from imposter syndrome, but is working hard to view herself with the same kindness she tries to meet learners with. Welcome, Gabby. It is great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm super excited to have you here and looking forward to chatting more with you and learning more about you today. As you know, all of the guests on this show are members of the Animal Training Academy. And in the Animal Training Academy, we talk a lot about our training, but all of us have rich, diverse stories that we don't always get to hear about. So we like to start this show off by learning a bit about our guest stories. Could you start us off today by talking a little bit about your story, including your life outside of animal training and how your animal training influences that life and vice versa?
Very cool. And I love this question. And obviously you shared it with me beforehand. And I had the chance to sort of think about this. And it was interesting just following the progression. Because I got my first dog just as I moved away from home, because my parents would never let me get a dog. And so, of course, that's the first thing I did when I moved away. And so I started school studying to be a social worker and had my first dog at the same time. And I was sort of learning about, the quadrants and the 4 consequences, both at the dog club, taking courses, and in school, taking an introduction to psychology and everything. So it was really a parallel process, and I think that's followed along all the way. So I also learned about, critical thinking. Started to learn more about that in my university studies, not viewing everything written as truth, basically. And I think that was a process for me as well, because when I first got my first puppy, I was reading everything about dog training, and I was just going like, okay, so this is how you do it. And then I would read another book, and I'd be like, no, okay, this is how you do it. And that poor puppy, she was put through some horrifying things, honestly, just because I was trying to follow all of the advice. And when I finally did find my way to positive reinforcement training, it really clicked into place. Just like, okay, I don't have to be an adversary with my dog, we can actually work together. And suddenly this little Jack Russell Terrier that would, growl back at me if I tried to growl at her, was, really enjoying training with me and doing things with me because it was on her terms. So I think that was the first step. And then just sort of becoming an instructor, learning more about behavior modification, outside the basic dog training, puppy class, that kind of thing. I was also working with behavior change in people. So that was sort of a parallel process of working with, at that time, being a probation officer and working in treatment programs with domestic violence offenders, intimate partner violence offenders. So that was interesting. That was obviously, it was based on cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of it, but also social learning and just sort of talking about very much the ABCs, but in human terms. So a lot of also putting the thoughts down on paper, like what are the inner antecedents, the outer antecedents of my behavior, talking about functional analysis in some sort. What am I, like they could obviously verbalize this, so they would be talking about what was I trying to achieve, what were the actual consequences of my actions, and we could talk about that. And we did this in group. So it's interesting just following along those processes, because at the same time I'm learning more about, the applied behavior analysis, and sort of learning these things at the same time from different areas and having them both sort of enrich each other's. So that was very cool. And I think, obviously, as so many of us, I've had to learn a lot about different areas of animal training because I've had some challenging pets. So that's definitely the way I came to it, was first, just finding positive reinforcement with my first dog, who, as I said, was a Jack Russell Terrier, and definitely enjoyed working with me a lot more than when I was working against her. But I mean, she was a great dog, not a lot of issues. I will say all my dogs are great dogs, obviously. I'm not trying to rate them on a scale of good to bad. But she was a pretty easy dog, I will say. She was probably a good first dog for me. She helped me find my way to positive reinforcement training. And other than that, we didn't have a lot of issues. But since then, I've had some dogs with some reactivity issues, as in, reacting strongly to environmental changes, such as lunging and barking towards strange dogs, humans, vehicles of different kinds, skateboards. So I've had those kind of challenges to work with, and I think we'll get into a little bit about those challenges later, perhaps. But also, I would say that the way that currently I work within an organization as an analyst, and that's also been super fascinating, just sort of taking it up to an organizational level. And I do not know, I know there's applied behavior analysis for organizations. I think it's called organizational behavior management, OBM. I do not know a lot about that. I haven't really done a deep dive into that, but I am constantly finding ways that, implementing change in an organization, how these tools from ABA help me in that. Just sort of, trying to, it's very easy sitting up at, the head office of a government agency and thinking, we're going to implement this change because it's good. It's obviously good to us, but sort of breaking it down and seeing, okay, but what is the process of implementing this change? What is it going to mean for, the probation officers in their daily life? What is it going to, what is the function of the change? What is the function that we see? What is the function we need them to see in order to actually change behavior? And what kind of prerequisites are there? What do they need to know in order to implement this change? So I find all that fascinating, and I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly finding things within the animal animal training world that I'm bringing into my daily work. And I'm constantly finding things in my daily work that I'm bringing with me to my animal training. Like just data collection is something I do quite a lot for work. Planning, a large part of my work that I do now is organizational planning and quality monitoring. So I can definitely see how that translates into my interests, my pretty geeky interests. I mean, my wife laughs at me pretty much in my Excel files over my animal training. But I would say that's definitely a strength of mine in my animal training, is that I tend to really want to see change and to sort of measure that baseline and see what happens, and to be able to have a clear process thought out, even if I have to change it along the way. So those are a couple of things. And then I know one thing that I really wanted to get into and talk to also is how Animal Training Academy has been really helpful, actually, for me as far as mental health goes, and how that's been affected, and also how that has affected my training. So again, it goes both ways. So let me see where to start. Basically, I do have a form of chronic depression. I'm diagnosed with dysthymia, I believe it's pronounced in English, and it's a chronic form of depression, basically a low-grade depression. And I've had periods where it's been worse. I've had periods of where I've been more depressed than others, and so. But struggling with depression for most of my life in one way or another, probably since my teen years. And more than anything, I would say, as you said in my intro, in my bio, I do struggle with viewing myself as kindly as I view my learners. I do have a lot of critical thoughts, a lot of, just sort of patterns of really putting blame on myself. And obviously, I would never blame a dog for behaving badly. And I'm going to use dog because that's the species I normally work with. But I would, I don't believe that dogs can behave badly or wrongly. They are just behaving in the way that they have previously been. It's been an effective behavior for them. It's achieved a function. And if they are not behaving the way I would wish they would, it's because they just don't have alternative behavior in their behavioral repertoire. So they may need to expand that. Or they don't have a learning history that supports that alternative behavior. So those are fixable. Obviously, that's something you can work on. But I don't quite have that viewpoint fluently yet for myself. I'm working on it. And I can see how last winter I was in a pretty bad depression place. I was actually on sick leave from work for a couple of months because of depression. And it really helped me just sort of writing about it on Animal Training Academy in behavioral terms, and sort of working on that mantra of I am doing the best that I know how given the current circumstances. Like, I do not have the alternative behavior in my repertoire yet. I do not have a learning history reinforcing alternative behavior yet. And sort of trying to keep that yet in there. Like, it's fixable. It's not what I am, it's how I'm feeling and my thoughts at the moment. And thoughts are behavior, and you can work on that. So what's really interesting is that I was doing therapy at the time. This was before I went on sick leave. My poor therapist had a hard time getting anywhere with me, I think, because I would show up and I would just bawl for like an hour for the entire appointment. And she'd be trying to, approach certain things. And I would just basically get there because I'd be holding myself together all week. And then I just let it all out. And so she was basically the one who said, hey, okay, because she knew I wouldn't get there on my own, or I'd get there on my own like a year down the line when it was going to take a long time to get back. So she was basically, okay, here's the thing. You need to call your boss. You need to say you're not coming into work. And then you need to go see a doctor. You need to see if you can, get on sick leave for a while, because you are like right now, you don't need just a weekend to recover. Like, you need more than that. And that was great. And the method she was working with and that we were able to approach a little bit more after that was compassion-focused therapy. I don't know if you've heard of it, because I know you're a social worker, so you may work in those circles as well.
I have not heard of that particular therapy, no.
And it's pretty cool. It's sort of like a third wave of cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's they talk a lot about 3 different emotional regulation systems, which was interesting when she was talking about them and presenting these to me, because I was like, is this somewhat related to Panksepp by any chance? And she was like, yes, actually, there is a bit of a Panksepp. It's basically 3 systems. She talks about the threat and self-protection system, and the drive and excitement system, and the contentment and social safeness system. And for me, it was interesting because our conversations would often be, she would, introduce things from a compassion-focused therapy point of view, and I would sort of translate them into applied behavioral analysis terms. So we would talk about the threat and self-protection system, and I'd be like, yes, that's where I live. And that's, negative reinforcement contingency, basically. It's like, I am doing things. My pure motivation for doing things is to escape, something aversive. I want to get rid of the aversiveness. So I'm behaving to avoid that. And that was my entire drive. It was so clear when I started to sort of map this out. Like, where do I spend my time? And I would spend it basically in the threat and self-protection system, just trying to get by. The drive and excitement system, that would be an R+ contingency, right? A positive reinforcement. You're actually seeking something. You're trying to gain a positive reinforcement. And that was pretty much lacking in my life. Which I think is very, very typical of depression. It's just like, there are no positive reinforcers. The ones that used to be positive reinforcers are lacking now. They don't fill the same need anymore, or you don't feel that. And it's hard to gain that motivation to sort of work towards something. So that made a lot of sense to me. Like, okay, I need to actively try to switch my mind around from escaping aversives and behaving to escape aversives to working towards gaining something that, I want. And there are things that have always been present that I get excited about, like learning and animal, training academy and just sort of doing courses. But I can also get into that in a sort of positive reinforcement, seeking knowledge kind of way, and then quickly revert to, I've decided to do this, so now I have to do it. And suddenly it becomes sort of a, negative reinforcement process where it's just sort of, I don't want to have the shame of not having done it, so I'm just going to keep, trying. Yeah. So that's something I struggled with, but it was really helpful just to see it in that kind of way, to see it in those behavioral terms, because suddenly it became something I could work with, like seeing that, okay, so maybe I'm 3% in the R+ contingency and 95% in the negative reinforcement contingency. And I could sort of try and work on expanding that R+ space. Because also the one that I had most trouble with, of course, was the contentment and social safeness system, which I was trying to sort of find a behavioral analysis component of that. And I would say, thinking out of a Lima process, I would say maybe that's, the first step of having basic needs met, antecedent arrangement, just having sort of good circumstances for behaving in the way that you would want to behave. And I think that's also a place where I needed to start, but I really had trouble defining that. I had trouble seeing where I was in that, because I was mostly in a sort of escaping aversives contingency. But that was interesting. So basically, my psychologist would, present these things, and we do exercise, out of, compassion focused therapy, which also had a lot of meditation and that kind of thing. But I would translate it also and bring in examples. And I'd often bring in, dog training examples to my therapist. And I'd be like, yeah, okay, so this is sort of like we'd be talking about behavior change and something about me changing. And I'd be talking about, okay, so how can I set up the criteria here so that I'm successful, and she'd be like, exactly. So we need to break it down. And she'd sort of help me out. And she knew nothing about dog training. But she definitely got it, from the terms we were speaking about. And it was just really helpful. It was really helpful to be able to have a shared language. And obviously, I wrote about this a lot on the Animal Training Academy, not the forums, but in the Facebook group. And I got so much help and so much helpful feedback and ways to just sort of challenge my thoughts sometimes and help me expand on my thinking.
Thank you so much, Gabby, for being willing to be so vulnerable and sharing about your experiences, all of them, but especially these experiences related to your mental health that you've been talking about here. Your whole story that you have shared so far just totally resonates with me. As you mentioned, we're both social workers, and lots of the things that you talked about training really resonated with me, but also a lot that you just shared about as well. I had some kind of aha moments when you talked about living in that kind of negative reinforcement contingency zone sometimes. I can definitely identify with that. You said that writing about it in ATA and the ATA community was really helpful. Are there other kind of specific things that you can think of that help you shift that perspective for yourself, to give yourself that same kind of grace that you're working to give other people and that comes so easily to give to the dogs and other animals in our lives sometimes? Does that question make sense?
Mm-hmm. It makes sense. And I'm trying to think, I think it's all about constantly reminding yourself, because it's so easy to forget. I think if I'm not actively thinking about it, like I said, I'm not fluent in it. You know what I mean? Like if I were fluent in it, I could probably let it go and it'd still be it would just be muscle memory, sort of having those mantras there. But I'm still at a place where I constantly have to remind myself. And I think it was really clear. I'm doing Emily Johnson-Vey's running course. And it's funny because she is obviously a successful dog trainer and people trainer and everything. And she has, and everyone who's doing the course is a dog trainer pretty much. So she had a question in the course early on where it was like, how do you view sort of building new behavior and habits in yourself versus in, an animal learner? And it's just interesting because obviously for me, it's like, I know theoretically that there is no difference. I know that behavior change works the same way. I know that I need to build it up progressively. I know that, I can't just do something, but somewhere in my mind, there's still that, I should just be able to decide and do it. I should just be able to be like, from now on, I'm running 3 times a week, and that's that. And, sort of set up a punishment system for me where I feel horribly ashamed if I don't make it. And that's that. And I do not know. I mean, yes, I know where it comes from. It comes from the cultural fog I think that's very much how we are raised. I think that's very much how we are taught to just sort of set your mind to it and just work through it, So it's not strange that that's the way we function, but it is there's a lot of unlearning to do, I would say. There's a lot of behaviors to unlearn in order to sort of replace them with alternative behavior. And I do have a tendency to fall back, especially if I get stressed. If there's a lot going on, it's so simple to fall back on those fluent behaviors that I've had years and years of, training and perfecting, as opposed to, using my new tools that I've actually been working really hard on. But I don't have the same amount of, reinforcement for that. I don't have the same amount of rehearsals of that behavior. I don't know if I answered your question, but I hope you understand what I mean, at least.
I totally understand what you mean. And it has prompted some other questions and thoughts with me as well about something that you said really early on when you were talking about your kind of shift in dog training and learning more about positive reinforcement training. And you said, and I loved this, you learned that I don't have to be an adversary with my dog. And as you've been talking about, some of your personal struggles and changing behaviors and things in yourself, I was thinking, we also don't have to be adversaries with ourselves or with the world at large. But then I also thought, but my gosh, as a crossover, as somebody who identifies as a crossover trainer myself, it's not like there's a switch that gets flipped and you're like, oh, I train this way and now I train this way, because those other behaviors are more fluent and it takes time to make those adjustments. So it just seems to all go together there. So.
But that makes perfect sense the way you put it. Like, it really is, like, my old way of existing really is being my own adversary. And that seems so counterproductive, but that's really, just being sort of like it's a fight of wills between, within me of sort of like, you should do this, but no, I'm not. And, and of course, it's also, as you say, it's not a switch you flip. And it's also something that gets fine-tuned over time, because I started working with positive reinforcement training. I mean, that was probably like 17, 18 years ago that I first experienced positive reinforcement training. But if I look at my training back then, I'm like, what was I doing? It's been fine-tuned. It's been completely overhauled. It's been, my understanding of sort of setting antecedents and not just sort of expecting behavior to happen out of nowhere and so that I can reinforce it, has changed my view of what kind of response from me is okay. Because I was definitely using punishment still, even though I wasn't aware of it. Even now, even in the past couple of years, things have happened with my training where I'm just like, wow. And I know you've taken like Sarah Owing's class on control as an illusion. And I've recently taken that as well. And it's like, well, yes, of course. But I was working with, negative punishment before.
Yeah. Very good points. And something else that you said, and that class is just amazing. I love everything that Sarah does is wonderful. And yes, I definitely love that class. But something that you mentioned before was you referenced the cultural fog before, and I think whether it's dealing with our dogs, whether it's looking at our own behavior, whether it's looking at other people's behavior, a lot of times within the culture, there's this expectation that people or animals should behave in a certain way when they don't, or we don't. I was trying to say they and we at the same time. When that doesn't happen, might be a different way to say it. When that doesn't happen, then maybe we get put in that adversary mode, to try to make it happen. So all very, very interesting. And I really appreciate everything that you've shared so far today. And like I said, it all just really resonates with me. And I thank you for being so vulnerable here and sharing about this. And I think that the audience is going to really enjoy hearing this, and that many people will identify with a lot that you've said as well.
Cool. I think there needs to be more of a conversation about mental health, because it isn't, if we can talk about, diabetes and heart conditions that needs medication or whatever, we should be able to speak in the same way about depression and anxiety and other mental health issues.
I completely agree. So thank you for being a leader in that area and sharing about that with us here today. If it's all right with you, I would like to shift gears just a little bit now and talk about some of your training specifically, which I know you have lots of amazing training that you could share with us. Hoping you could choose maybe just one thing right now, a recent challenge that you've worked through with an animal in your life, kind of how you worked through that challenge and some things that you learned from it.
Sure. Well, my first thought in hearing this question is like, well, when are you ever done with the behavioral challenge? So I would say it's definitely something that I've come a long way in. We're probably still, we probably still have a long way to go. But I immediately thought of my foster dog, Riff Raff. He's from Spain. His real name is Rufo, but we call him Riff Raff. Just suits him. And he was adopted from Spain to Sweden and basically bit everyone in his new adoptive family in the first week he was there repeatedly. They understandably couldn't keep him. And having had a dog previously that would bite out of pain, I saw something in this dog and thought maybe we can help this dog in a way that we couldn't help our previous beloved Tinos. That he was eventually euthanized, only about 3.5 years old, because of huge pain issues that he struggled with his entire life, basically, and that we eventually couldn't treat anymore with pain meds. But this dog, so my plan was, okay, we're going to take him in. I'm going to get him muzzle trained, and we're going to take him to the vet so he can be looked over, because I'm convinced there's something medically wrong with him. Well, he got here. We had a big, hands-off sort of process with him where we wouldn't touch him. Even when he requested touch, we wouldn't touch him, basically. We would only, handle him as little as possible. And we did have incidents, obviously, but I started training him pretty much immediately with his muzzle, and everything was going great until one day he basically attacked me mid-muzzle training. And I was like, well, crap, I need to have a muzzle on this dog in order to muzzle train him. Collecting a little bit more data on it, I discovered that it's actually feeding, like eating while in the muzzle, that triggered him. Now, I don't really like the word triggered because it sounds like there's a button that gets pushed, but the effect was pretty similar. It was very quick, a quick and instant reaction of him going from happily, eating his tube of delicious gooey stuff in his muzzle to sort of biting all around him, trying to get rid of the muzzle, get rid of your hands around him. So it became an issue. I was like, well, okay, so I've trained him. He will happily put his muzzle, his snout in the muzzle. He's fine with me handling the straps, but we can't get forward because I can't reward him in the muzzle. And I was seeing down the line how, I had essentially wanted to be able to put a muzzle on him and then keep, reinforcing him intermittently while he was having it on, and, start training other kind of handling of being able to sort of touch him in different parts of his body while he had the muzzle on for safety. And I was like, well, if I can't reinforce him, what am I going to do? So I obviously brought this challenge to Animal Training Academy. I had some great help there, just sort of thinking outside of the box. And we have continued with the muzzle training, I will say. We've had to work without feeding him in the muzzle. So we work on, sort of just building up duration of him having it on. Then sort of back chaining it to, last step is taking your head out of the muzzle and eating. And then building from there. So we could add duration to that. But we still had the issue of, I wanted to work with him on different handling skills and strategies. I wanted to be able to brush him, to touch him, to trim his nails. And he definitely has a learning history of, if hands are present, that's the antecedent. If hands are present and you are uncomfortable, bite. And he's not a big dog. He's about 15 pounds. He's, a tiny little thing. Super cute, looks like a teddy bear, makes it really hard because you really just want to, squeeze him and kiss him, and you cannot touch him unless he's very, very clear that that's okay. But he is a funny dog. You can play with him. You can, sort of wrestle with your hands, and he will sort of like attack your hands, but with his mouth, but in a super soft, it's interesting. Yeah. So if he's in a sort of playful mode, you can do anything. See, I'm getting off track already. I'm going to find my way back. But yeah, so we're still working with the muzzle, but I had to find another way to work on the handling to sort of do that. And in the process, we also decided, okay, this dog is in a lot of pain. So we're like, we can't wait for him to get completely muzzle trained. We're just going to have to, force on a muzzle on him, get him to the vet, and check him out. And of course, he did have some huge discomfort. He showed signs of discomfort in his lower back and tail, and that's probably, we think, secondary to him having patella luxation in both his knees, and one of them is really bad, and he has some arthritis in that leg, and he needs to have surgery for that. So, we had that as well. We need to get him ready for surgery. We need to be able to take care of him post-op, and that was a challenge. And so I talked a lot with my vet, who is fabulous. She's a clicker trainer as well. She works a lot with horses. And, she was talking about, could we do some kind of protected contact? And I was like, I do not know. How do you do that? I mean, I get how you do protected contact with a horse. You put them on the other side of a barrier. But how am I supposed to do that with this 15-pound dog and still be able to reach and handle him without having my hands in his face? And I kept mulling this over, and then I think it was during Clicker Expo, I saw something where I started getting some ideas from having seen Ken Ramirez previously give a lecture on your medical training, basically. And I was thinking about all those smaller zoo animals and the protected contact they do there. Obviously, if you have, a sea otter that needs care, you're not going to muzzle train it. I was like, yeah, that's right. They don't muzzle train every sea otter. They teach them to go into, an enclosed space where they can't sort of turn around and snap at you, but there's, some kind of accessibility to some part of the animal's body. So I started thinking about that. And then at Clicker Expo, I think it was Laura Monaco Torelli who showed some kind of barrier that she had made. And I was like, I started designing. I have that in my Clicker Expo notes. I'm designing a little enclosure. So I am not a builder. Everything I build is very crooked and very unstable, but I do it. That's one of the few areas I realized where I'm really great at, staying at the good enough level of not having perfection is my standard kind of thing. So I've been working on this enclosement, and I've been training him along the way to be comfortable. And we have gotten to him, sort of standing on this platform with a wall part around him. It's going to be a complete tunnel and a barrier with a net and with a treat and train ahead of him, so that he can get reinforcement on the other side of the barrier without me adding in my hands anywhere near his mouth. And in that way, we've been able to train brushing, touching different parts of his body. I plan on doing the same thing with nail clipping and just sort of teaching him to put his paw through a small hole in the barrier. And it's just been so much fun training this. And I think he feels more secure and I feel more secure with him being, behind a barrier, and he can leave at any time, obviously. So I love that it puts so much pressure on me as a trainer, because if I am not, if my timing is off, if I do not have a high enough rate of reinforcement, he is out of there. He's not going to stand there and be touched. And that's information for me. And I can't rely on some kind of restraint or fall back on old habits of we're just going to have to, keep you here in some way. Nope. I have to go back and redesign my training plan and have a higher rate of reinforcement, or break it down into smaller steps, or, realize he wasn't ready for that move. And while there is a time pressure on this because he is getting surgery and that's scheduled, we are so much further ahead than we were, back when when I was like, oh, I'll muzzle train him in a couple of weeks and then we'll go to the vets. So that's something I'm really proud of, just because it's thinking outside of the box and actually sort of taking different people's suggestions and putting them together into something really concrete and actionable. And I feel it's been very successful so far.
Yeah, thank you for sharing about that. It's been so fun to watch your journey with Rip Raff, and not just fun, but so enlightening and so much to learn there. You're right. He is so adorable too. He is the kind of dog you would just want to try to cuddle all the time. I also was thinking, you said thinking outside of the box, and I was thinking that same thing as well. That's how you've been able to have that's one of the ways that you've been able to have so much success with this, is being willing to think outside of the box a little bit and change your plans from dropping the idea of we're going to use the muzzle for handling to what else can I do, and getting really creative with that by relying on ideas of others and kind of your networks and things. So that's wonderful. And it's been really, really nice to watch the progress that you've had with him. That has to be very reinforcing for you.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and again, with the data collection, also just seeing the wonders that pain meds have done for this dog. I mean, because I kept a graph of sort of the amount of interactions we had with him, the amount of handling in sort of ratio to the amount of bites and the severity of his bites. And I have a very, very clear graph with like the red lines marking difference, changing the meds basically. And it's such a clear curve of, pain is an issue. But of course, you take away the pain and there's still some very, very fluent learned behavior that you have to sort of hang on to. But yeah, and definitely a lot of credit goes to also Eva Bertelsen. I had, a one-on-one coaching session with her that was really helpful just in thinking about protected contact, but also thinking about the, hands as antecedents. I think that was really helpful for me because it was very clear we were trying to do other kind of frustration exercises without hands present, like as in he's great at food puzzles and sort of tearing up boxes to get food. And her suggestion was sort of like add in some unsolvable problems for him and see how he handles them, like try to get him to see how he handles frustration a little bit. And one of them was eating through a fence, like a netted fence where he would be able to get some of the treats, but not others, because that would be sort of similar to the muzzle situation. And from that, it's just so clear. Obviously, the strategy attack and bite is not something that he's going to use on a fence. That has no learning history. It's, hands present. Hands are great at biting towards because they will be removed and you will get what you want, basically, which is space or, So just being able to think of it like that and using more of a fade-in technique of having him, sort of eat through something and then hands getting closer and closer, and also teaching him that the best way, alternative behavior to get what you want is not like pushing through and pushing harder, but rather backing up and getting reinforcement that way. So that's also been really helpful. But yeah, there's so many people who have helped me. I could probably write like a long, if I were to write a book about Riff Raff, the sort of acknowledgement section would be half the book.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about that here with us. I think you make a really important point too about checking for that pain, and the change that you saw in his behavior when adjusting for that pain. I think if the animals in our lives are behaving in a way like biting or, out of characteristic for them in some way, or just behaving in some super challenging ways, it's always kind of important to think about pain and just generally how are they feeling first. So I'm glad that you were able to help him with that. And it seems like that gave you a bit of a jump on working on some of those behavioral issues and the learned history that was there as well. So excellent points. And I've loved following your story in the Animal Training Academy community, having a chance to learn from Team Riff Raff there. And I'm sure the audience is going to like learning about some of that experience today. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. I'm hoping that now you could share with us another training situation that you are either a training situation that you are proud of or one that you have found reinforcing in some way. Thanks to Anat Shalev for adjusting that question a few sessions or a few episodes ago for me. So either one, a training situation you're proud of or a training situation that you have found reinforcing. And it could be that there's one that works for both.
I think there might be. And I will see if I break the rules of this question. I don't know what the rules are, but we'll see.
There are no rules here. No rules.
Yeah, because I mean, there are a lot of behaviors in this, but it's really a process that I'm thinking about. And it's with my dog, Jinx. Because we've had quite the journey. I think she is my greatest training challenge yet, and but also one of the most reinforcing journeys, really, because and I mean, there's a lot of behavior in this. Like I said, we're definitely going to be able to break this down into observable and measurable differences because they are there. But I really, I had to sit down and think like, okay, what's the actual behavior that I'm talking about here? But okay, so Jinx came to us. We adopted her when she was, well, on paper, she was like a year and 3 months old. We believe she's a lot younger, like maybe 9 months when she came to us, because she grew a lot. she got a lot bigger, and she looked like a real adolescent dog when she came to us. She had, the really long paws, long legs, big paws, everything, ears that she grew into. But we had just lost Tinos, the dog I was talking about, and I threw myself into getting another dog. We had Lily also, who is our little Chihuahua mix. But she is such a quiet and calm dog when she's not, having her nightly play session, that you could barely, notice she was there. I needed, well, it was too quiet at home. I wanted some more action, and boy, did I get it. Let's just say that. So Jinx didn't have any on-site, behavioral issues. I actually, tried to make it easy on myself. I was like, we are in we're grieving. Let's try and get a dog that's just going to be, fun and easygoing. Yeah. I'm just laughing at that because it's like, how will you ever know? And the dogs that find their way to our house tend not to be somehow. So she arrived. Super sweet. We picked her up from her. She was in a foster home. She was very, loose, wiggly, friendly, happy-go-lucky. And we were like, oh my God, she's wonderful. Brought her home. About 2 days after settling into our home, she started showing like huge reactivity issues to other dogs. And at first I was like, okay, so I've lived with a reactive dog before. It's probably me. I'm probably, sort of like shortening the leash or holding my breath when I see another dog. She told me really quickly that wasn't the issue by reacting to dogs that I hadn't seen yet, so sort of having a very clear reaction. And when I say she reacted to other dogs, she would lunge, bark, redirect, bite, whatever was close to her. And she would do this if she saw a dog from half a kilometer away, so 500 meters away. So if, we tried to do we worked a lot with BAT, behavioral adjustment training, and we would be on big fields. She would see the dog, because if it was further than half a kilometer away, she wouldn't see the dog, she would not notice it. So if she noticed it, she would react very strongly. And we were trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we help her notice it? So we would actually start with just sort of marking and moving. Like, she would notice a dog. The second she noticed it, we'd mark, we'd move out of sight, like behind something, and then we'd work there with her, just knowing that there was a dog half a kilometer away, behind that hill over there. So just to give sort of a perspective on what I'm talking about. And, our dog sitter, we had a dog walker that would hang out at our house and take care of our dogs during the day when we were at work. She quit, day 2 because she got bitten by Jinx. And so we were in a tough position. We, at the time, were living in a city where we had moved to for work. We didn't really know anyone there. Yeah, it was a tough situation. And we were living in an apartment in a city, and this dog would react to dog barks as well. Like if she could hear them, she would react. And it could be that kind of background noise, on the TV when they open a window. You hear like a sound mat of just sort of kids playing at a playground nearby. And maybe there's a dog barking, somewhere in the distance. She would, go from resting on the couch to just jumping up and just bite whatever was near her, when she heard that. So that was kind of scary. And she also had some issues with nightly barking that we did not understand. She would get up in the night and bark her head off, and also, again, bite anything she came in contact with, so you couldn't touch her at those times. It mostly happened at night. It mostly happened when she was sleeping, that she would get up very suddenly, and we could not hear anything. We couldn't hear any dogs barking. And it often happened about the same time at night. We could not figure this out. So basically, we had about a year of me sleeping in the bathroom with her, because that was one place where she was pretty calm. We didn't have any windows in there. And it was not a big bathroom, so I can lay stretched out. I know I was sleeping with like my feet on like a yoga mat with my feet underneath the tub. And then we tried to like soundproof one of our closets. So we had like the foam up on the walls and just sort of we were so scared of getting evicted basically, because we had a dog that was barking her head off every night. So I slept in there for a while. We finally found a house out in the country where we rented, and we moved out there. And she was, so much more relaxed because there weren't those daily triggers of meeting dogs. And so suddenly we had a dog who would, relax, take it easy. We were working with her reactivity on the side, but we were having trouble making progress because she was, obviously she was encountering these triggers, and she wasn't resting as much as she needed to rest because of the nightly barking. Obviously, we went to the vet. Speaking about pain, I mean, that's where my head goes to. There's something wrong with her physically. Is there something she would also, do things like she would relieve herself on the bed. She'd pee the bed basically, from what I felt was like stress or something. She could just have been out and peeing and then come in and pee on the bed. Had trouble settling down. So obviously we went to the vet. We had them take all kinds of tests. They couldn't find anything. Couldn't find any pain, we just couldn't find anything wrong with her. So they were basically, it's behavioral. We tried behavioral meds. She basically got a little bit worse on those. And there are no veterinary behaviorists in Sweden. Otherwise, that would have been a natural next step. We do now have some vets that are, specializing more towards behavior, which is great. But so we really struggled. So we moved out into the country. She was finally calm during the day, but the nightly attacks kept going. And, we were in a completely different environment. We tried filming. We could not understand what was going on. And so we were sort of at our wits' end. At this point, I don't think I'd slept for more than 4 to 5 hours a night for a year and a half almost. We had, I had gone periods of just sleeping, an hour at a time during the night. And I was sort of like Googling all around the internet, just sort of like looking at like psychosis in dog, just Googling anything I could find. And I finally found something that sounded like Jinx. And it was a form of epilepsy, basically, where the dogs would behave in a very certain pattern, and it fit with how she acted before and after, like waking up from sleep, going into this mode, and then after that being like going and basically drinking all of the water in the water bowl. And it just fit. So I consulted with like a neuro specialist in dogs and tried to ask, could this be it? And she said, yeah, it could be. So we basically tried we went to see a specialist in Stockholm, which was the closest place. She was put on some medication, and voila, the nightly attacks disappeared. So we don't know, obviously. We do know that epileptic medication had an effect on the behavior, and her diagnosis is epilepsy. idiopathic epilepsy, but we don't know completely. We've had to switch her medication up several times because it's sort of stopped having an effect, and then we'd add on something and it'd go back to normal and that kind of thing. But that is actually to say what I'm focused on here is her reactivity, but just sort of when you have those things that are outside of the behavioral realm, like I couldn't have gained the results that I did with just the training. Like there was a medical aspect to it that needed to be addressed, and it was showing up as behavior. So I think that's really interesting, when there's a behavior issue and I can measure it in behavior change, but it's actually, something underlying that needed to be addressed. And all that to say that after we sort of figured out that part, then we started to really make progress on her reactivity. And the thing that I'm really, really proud of, and this is where we come into behavioral change, is that a couple of days ago, I was doing a man trailing course with another ATA member, Marie Conan, and Jinx was trailing this person, and that was out of sight and everything, and she was doing a beautiful job, just sort of like tracking and looking in for the scent. And we came around a corner and there was a little dachshund there and on a flexi leash, walking along there. And this was Jinx is definitely, she still reacts to other dogs. And normally I think she would have reacted at that distance because we were really close. It was just a couple of meters from this dachshund. And Jinx just sort of stopped for a second and then was like, okay, so she went that way, but I'll just do a little detour here, and just sort of walked in a little bow around this little dachshund and just kept working. And my heart was just singing, and Marie's heart was singing because she saw Jinx in the beginning, when we were at this sort of weekend or week away dog course that was for reactive dogs, and Jinx still couldn't, she was too reactive to be at the reactive dog camp, basically. So she had to be on her own out in the woods with me. And so, it was just amazing to see that difference of her actually using her skills and also being so, up in her, I'm working right now. I need to solve my issue and that dog is in the way. So how do I handle this? Sort of navigating that with very little input from me. That was just beautiful. And that really reminded me of how far we've come from, those first bites in our legs and hands and clothes that have been ruined, and dog walkers that have quit, and sort of crying ourselves to sleep many a time over our dog that was supposed to be the easy dog that was, going to help us through our grieving process. But she has taught me so much, and I'm so grateful for her, and she is seriously the best dog ever.
What a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us. And my heart is singing for you for the experience that you had with her at Marie's man trailing workshop yesterday. My heart is also green with envy that you were at that workshop. What a fun time that must have been. But yeah, wonderful, wonderful story about Jinx. And I really appreciate that both of your stories make me think of something that I have heard Dr. Susan Friedman say about the need to keep our science sisters close. It's important for us to get really good at using the behavioral lens to change behavior, but to remember that there are other important factors that can influence behavior as well, and that we need to be ready and willing to address those. So I really appreciate you sharing about both of these stories that are kind of reminders of that for me. So we are just about at the end of our time here together today, Gabby. I could ask you 100 more questions, but for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. But before we do, could you please share with everybody how they can get in touch with you to train with you, or to ask questions, or just to learn more about what you're doing?
Sure. And this is where I'm going to look at my cheat sheet because I don't actually know my own handles and stuff. But I am on Instagram as @R+, and that's written out RPLUS _rescues, RESCUES. The dog academy that I'm at, R+ Hundskola, is at, for those in Sweden, I should say, because it's all in Swedish, or for those who are Swedish speaking, is at www.r+, written out again, RPLUS.se. And my name is Gabriella Boijsen on Facebook, and feel free to find me there and message me there.
Thank you so much. And we will, of course, link to all of that in the show notes. And just before we do wrap up here, too, I also wanted to offer a special thank you. I know that you have fostered multiple dogs in your time. And as you said in your bio, have a special heart for rescues. And a little less than a year ago, I brought a foster dog into my home and shared a lot about that in the ATA community. And you were incredibly generous with your time and your thoughts and your ideas in helping me work through some challenges at that time. And then when I introduced my new puppy as well. So I appreciate that. And thank you very much for that.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for letting us be a part of that journey.
My pleasure. I'm always happy to get great ideas from people like you. So thank you. So thank you again for coming on the show today, for everything that you've shared on behalf of myself and everybody listening. We just appreciate everything you've shared. And thank you for taking the time to come and talk with us all today, Gabby.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
We do, of course, appreciate all of you tuning in as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and are interested in carrying on the conversation about working with the animals in our lives in the most positive, most fun, and most choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.atamember.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode, though. Thank you so much for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.